Imagine a child, barely 11, standing up to an entire room of adults with a single sentence that stops time. Real family doesn't hide truth behind polished silverware. The silence that followed was deafening, and my daughter Lila was the one who said it. That moment changed everything for us. I'm Nora, and this is the story of how my little girl taught me what courage really means. I'm Nora Ellis, 35, a freelance illustrator, a wife, and a mother to Lila, my 11-year-old daughter, who sees the world with a clarity that humbles me daily. She's my only child from a previous relationship, brought into my marriage with Caleb, my husband of 6 years. Caleb is a steady presence, a high school history teacher with a quiet strength and a laugh that fills a room. From the moment he met Lila, he embraced her as his own, showing up for her piano recitals, helping with math homework, and teaching her how to ride a bike. But not everyone in his family welcomed her with the same warmth. Enter Evelyn, my mother-in-law, a woman who curates her life like a museum exhibit, flawless, controlled, and untouchable. Evelyn Harper is the matriarch of the Harper family, a retired interior designer who hosts elaborate gatherings to showcase her impeccable taste. Her home is a showcase of crystal chandeliers, mahogany furniture, and heirloom silverware passed down through generations. She's the kind of person who can make you feel small with a single, perfectly worded compliment. From the day I met her, I sensed her unease with Lila. It wasn't overt hostility. Evelyn was too polished for that. But a subtle distance, a smile that never reached her eyes when she looked at my daughter. When Caleb and I married, Lila was 5. By 6, she was calling him Dad on her own, a moment that made my heart swell. I thought we were building something solid, a blended family that could weather anything. But there were signs, small at first, that Evelyn didn't see Lila as part of the Harper legacy. At family gatherings, she'd shower her biological grandchildren, her darlings, as she called them, with gifts like monogrammed sweaters or engraved lockets, while Lila received generic toys, often handed to her without a word. She'd introduce her grandchildren as my precious Emma, my sweet Noah. But Lila was just Nora's girl. Once, when Lila called Caleb Dad in her presence, Evelyn's lips pursed and she said, "Oh, how sweet she's so attached to you." The words were kind, but the tone was a wall. I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was generational, that Evelyn just needed time to adjust to our blended family. I wanted to believe her actions weren't deliberate, that if I was patient, she'd come around. So I smiled, brought homemade desserts to her dinners, and made sure Lila was polite and presentable. I thought I could win her over. But Lila, with her quiet perceptiveness, noticed things I tried to ignore. At 7, after a Christmas, where she got a store-bought puzzle while her cousins got hand-stitched quilts, she asked, "Mom, why does Grandma Evelyn treat me like I'm visiting?" I hugged her and said, "She's just set in her ways, sweetheart." But inside, I was crumbling. The tension built over years, a slow drip of microaggressions that I swallowed to keep the peace. I didn't want to be the difficult daughter-in-law, the one who disrupted the Harper family's carefully curated harmony. Caleb saw it too, but he's conflict-averse, always smoothing things over with a shrug and a, "That's just Mom." I let it slide, convincing myself that Lila was young, that she'd be okay as long as Caleb and I loved her fiercely. But I was wrong. The breaking point came at one of Evelyn's legendary Sunday brunches, a gathering that would expose the truth and change our family forever. It was a crisp autumn morning when we arrived at Evelyn's sprawling colonial home for the brunch. She'd invited the entire Harper clan, siblings, cousins, in-laws, and a dozen grandchildren, for what she called a celebration of togetherness. The invitation was formal, printed on cream cardstock with gold foil, delivered by mail. Lila, clutching my hand as we walked up the cobblestone path, whispered, "Do you think Grandma will like my dress?" She'd chosen a navy blue dress with tiny white flowers, her favorite. "She'll love it," I said, forcing a smile, but my stomach churned with unease. Evelyn's dining room was a vision of elegance, a long mahogany table draped in white linen, set with her prized sterling silverware and porcelain plates, each one hand-painted with delicate roses. Crystal juice glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Every detail screamed perfection, except for Lila's place setting. There, among the pristine porcelain, sat a neon green plastic plate with cartoon dinosaurs, paired with a mismatched plastic fork. It looked like something you'd find at a toddler's birthday party, not a formal brunch. Lila's face fell as she saw it, her hand tightening in mine. The other children, Emma, Noah, and their cousins, had porcelain plates, just like the adults. Only Lila's was different. The room buzzed with chatter, but I felt the air shift. Caleb's sister, Rachel, glanced at the plate and quickly looked away. His cousin Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. No one said anything. I felt my cheeks burn, a mix of anger and embarrassment. Lila stood frozen, her eyes scanning the table, then settling on me. I wanted to scoop her up and leave, but instead, I turned to Evelyn, who was arranging a vase of lilies at the head of the table. "Evelyn," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Why is Lila's plate different?" She turned, her smile as polished as her silverware. "Oh, Nora, it's just tradition. The porcelain is for family." Her words landed, like a slap, casual but cutting. The room went quiet, forks pausing midair, eyes darting between us. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Lila stepped forward. She pushed the plastic plate away with a gentle, deliberate motion, looked Evelyn in the eye, and said, "Real family doesn't hide truth behind polished silverware." The silence was absolute. Evelyn's smile faltered. Caleb's jaw dropped. Even the kids stopped whispering. Lila, at 11, had said what I hadn't dared to in 6 years. Her voice was steady, her eyes unflinching. I was stunned, proud, and ashamed, all at once. Ashamed that my daughter had to fight a battle I'd avoided for too long. That moment was a spark, and what came next would set our family on a new path. Before that brunch, life with the Harper family was a delicate dance of politeness and pretense. I'd married Caleb 6 years ago, after meeting him at a friend's book club. He was thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor and a knack for making Lila feel safe. My previous relationship had left me cautious, a single mom carrying the weight of a messy past. Caleb was different. He didn't just accept Lila, he celebrated her. He'd spend hours helping her build Lego castles or reading her favorite fantasy novels aloud. When she started calling him Dad, it felt like a victory, a sign that we were building something real. But Evelyn was a shadow over that joy. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention without raising her voice. Her home was her kingdom, every detail curated to reflect her status as the Harper matriarch. She'd host Easter brunches, Thanksgiving feasts, and summer barbecues, each one a performance of family unity. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a hierarchy, and Lila and I were always on the outside looking in. From the start, Evelyn treated me like an interloper. When Caleb introduced us, she'd said, "So you're the one with the daughter?" Her tone clipped, as if Lila was a footnote in my biography. I tried to win her over. I'd arrive early to her events, help with dishes, compliment her decor. I thought if I proved myself worthy, she'd accept Lila too. But her gestures toward Lila were always perfunctory. A pat on the head, a generic, "How's school?" Never the warmth she reserved for her biological grandchildren. The slights piled up. At a family picnic, Evelyn gave her grandkids personalized beach towels, but Lila got a plain one from the dollar store. During a holiday card photo, she positioned Lila slightly behind the others, as if she didn't quite fit. Once, when Lila proudly showed her a drawing she'd made, Evelyn glanced at it and said, "How nice," before turning to praise Noah's stick figure sketch like it was a masterpiece. I saw the hurt in Lila's eyes, but she never complained. She'd just go quiet, retreating into herself. I confronted Caleb about it once, after a birthday party where Evelyn forgot to include Lila in the cake-cutting ceremony. "Do you see how your mom treats her?" I asked, my voice shaking. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's just traditional, Nora. She'll come around." I wanted to believe him, but the years ticked by, and nothing changed. I started to notice Lila's hesitation before family events, the way she'd ask if she could stay home instead. "Do I have to go?" she'd say, her voice small. I'd hug her and insist, thinking exposure would normalize things. I was wrong. By the time of the brunch, I was exhausted from pretending. The weight of Evelyn's subtle rejections had worn me down, and I could see it wearing on Lila too. She was perceptive, picking up on the unspoken before I did. Once, after a tense dinner, she asked, "Mom, does Grandma think I'm not really part of the family?" I fumbled for an answer, settling on, "She's just different with her feelings." But Lila's question haunted me. I was failing her by staying silent, by hoping politeness would fix what was broken. The brunch was meant to be a grand affair, a celebration of Evelyn's 65th birthday. She'd planned every detail, from the lavender-scented napkins to the tiered fruit tarts. The invitation had felt like a summons, and I spent the week preparing Lila, coaching her to smile and be polite, even as my own resolve wavered. When we arrived, the house was a spectacle of elegance, but the sight of that plastic plate shattered any hope I had of blending in. It wasn't just a plate. It was a symbol of exclusion, a deliberate message that Lila didn't belong. When Evelyn said, "The porcelain is for family," I felt my world tilt. I wanted to scream, to upend the table, but I was paralyzed by years of conditioning to keep the peace. Lila, though, wasn't. Her words, "Real family doesn't hide truth behind polished silverware," cut through the room like a blade. They weren't just a rebuke to Evelyn. They were a wake-up call for me. I'd spent years teaching Lila to be polite, to fit in, but she'd learned something I hadn't. Sometimes truth is more important than harmony. The silence after her words was suffocating. Evelyn's face froze, her perfect composure cracking. Caleb stared at Lila, then at me, his eyes wide with something like awe. The other guests, Rachel, Mark, their spouses, shifted uncomfortably, their eyes on their plates. I could feel the weight of their unspoken thoughts, the tension of a family dynamic laid bare. Lila stood tall, her small frame radiating a strength I hadn't realized she possessed. In that moment, I knew I had to match her courage. The spark she'd lit was about to ignite something bigger. The silence stretched, heavy and unbroken, as Lila's words hung in the air. I looked at my daughter, her chin lifted, her eyes steady on Evelyn. She wasn't angry or defiant, just certain, like she'd been carrying this truth for years and finally set it free. I felt a surge of pride, but also a sharp pang of guilt. How many times had I let her feel less than, all to avoid rocking the boat? That ended now. I set my napkin down, the soft clink of my fork against the porcelain plate louder than it should have been. "Lila's right," I said, my voice steady, despite the knot in my chest. "Family isn't about plates or traditions. It's about love, and you've made it clear Lila doesn't fit into your version of it." Evelyn's eyes widened, her fingers tightening around her juice glass. She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. "You've treated her like an outsider from the day we met. The toys, the comments, the way you look past her. It's not subtle, Evelyn. It's cruel." The room was still, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. Caleb's sister, Rachel, looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. Mark coughed, his wife glancing nervously at him. The kids, sensing the tension, sat frozen, their eyes darting between the adults. Evelyn's smile was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that betrayed her discomfort. "Nora," she said, her voice low, "you're making a scene over a plate. It's just a silly tradition." "It's not about the plate," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It's about what it represents. You've spent years making Lila feel like she doesn't belong, and I've let it happen because I didn't want to cause trouble. But I'm done. She's my daughter, and she's Caleb's daughter, and she deserves to be treated like family, not like a guest you tolerate." Caleb, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Nora's right. I've seen it too, and I should have said something sooner. Lila is my daughter, and I won't let her be treated like she's less than anyone else here." He stood, walked to Lila's seat, and picked up the plastic plate. Without a word, he carried it to the kitchen. I heard a clatter as it hit the sink, followed by the sound of a cabinet opening. He returned with a porcelain plate, identical to the others, and set it in front of Lila with a gentle smile. "This is your place," he said to her. "Always has been." Lila looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. The word "Dad" landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. Evelyn flinched, her composure slipping further. For the first time, I saw something like vulnerability in her eyes. But it was fleeting, replaced quickly by a defensive glare. "This is absurd," she said, her voice sharp. "I've never treated Lila poorly. You're all blowing this out of proportion." "No, we're not," Rachel said suddenly, her voice cutting through Evelyn's protest. "Mom, I've watched you do this for years. You act like Lila's not really part of the family, and it's not okay. She's a kid, a great kid, and she doesn't deserve this." Rachel's words stunned me. I hadn't expected support, not from her. She'd always been close to Evelyn, the dutiful daughter who never challenged the family script. But now, she was breaking ranks. Mark nodded. "I've got a stepson," he said. "I'd fight anyone who treated him the way you've treated Lila. Family isn't about blood. It's about who you choose to love." The room felt different now, like the air had shifted. Evelyn looked around, her eyes searching for allies, but none came. Her grandchildren, her darlings, sat quietly, their eyes on Lila, who was watching the scene unfold with a calm I couldn't fathom. "Is it okay if I eat now?" Lila asked, her voice soft but clear. I nodded, my throat tight. "Of course, sweetheart." She picked up her fork, the porcelain plate gleaming under the chandelier. The tension didn't vanish, but it eased, like a knot loosening. Conversation started again, stilted at first, then flowing more naturally. Evelyn said little, her silence louder than any words she could have spoken. As we ate, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I'd carried the weight of Evelyn's disapproval, letting it shape how I moved through her world. I'd taught Lila to be polite, to shrink herself to fit Evelyn's expectations. But today, Lila had shown me what it meant to stand tall, to speak truth without apology. And Caleb, for the first time, had chosen us over his mother's comfort. That plate, that moment, was a turning point, not just for Lila, but for all of us. The brunch continued, but it wasn't the same. The porcelain plate in front of Lila seemed to glow, a quiet symbol of her rightful place at the table. She ate, slowly, her eyes scanning the room, as if she knew this moment was bigger than any of us. Caleb kept his hand on her shoulder, a silent promise that he was with her. I felt a mix of relief and resolve, like I'd finally stepped out of a shadow I'd been living in for years. Evelyn, though, was a study in control. She sipped her juice, her movements precise, her face a mask of composure. But I could see the cracks, her tightened jaw, the way her fingers gripped her glass a little too hard. She was rattled, and for the first time, she wasn't dictating the room's rhythm. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, almost too calm. "Well," she said, "I didn't realize a plate could cause such a fuss. Perhaps we can move on and enjoy the day." It was a dismissal, an attempt to sweep the moment under her perfectly pressed tablecloth, but I wasn't letting it go. "It's not about moving on," I said, my voice steady. "It's about acknowledging what's been happening. You've made Lila feel like she doesn't belong, and that's not something we can just brush off." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Caleb spoke again. "Mom, this isn't just about today. It's about every time you've treated Lila differently. I should have called it out years ago, and I'm sorry I didn't." His apology wasn't just to Evelyn. It was to me, to Lila. I saw the weight of it in his eyes, the regret for all the times he'd stayed silent to avoid conflict. I reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it gently. Evelyn's gaze flicked to our joined hands, then away. "I've always included her," she said, her voice tight. "I've never meant to make her feel less than." "Then why the plastic plate?" Rachel asked, her tone gentle but firm. "Why single her out today, in front of everyone?" Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had no answer. The silence that followed was different, not heavy, but clarifying, like the moment after a storm when the air feels clean. Lila, oblivious to the adult tension, or perhaps choosing to rise above it, started talking to her cousin Emma about a book they'd both read. Her voice was light, her smile genuine. The other kids joined in, and soon the table was alive with chatter again, but it felt different. Less performative, more real. Evelyn sat quietly, her eyes fixed on her plate. I wondered what she was feeling, anger, shame, or something deeper, but I didn't care as much as I once would have. My focus was on Lila, on Caleb, on the family we were building, not the one Evelyn wanted to control. As we left that day, the weight I'd carried for years felt lighter. Lila skipped to the car, her dress swishing, her face brighter than it had been in months. Caleb held my hand, his grip firm. "I'm sorry," he said again, quieter this time. "I should have stepped up sooner." I looked at him, seeing the man who'd chosen us when it mattered most. "You did today," I said. "That's what counts." In the car, Lila hummed a tune, her head resting against the window. "Was I okay, Mom?" she asked as we pulled onto the highway. I turned to her, my heart full. "You were more than okay, Lila. You were brave." She smiled, a small, knowing smile, and went back to humming. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she said, "I didn't like the plastic plate, but I'm glad I said something. It felt right." I kissed her forehead, my eyes stinging. "It was right, sweetheart. Always speak your truth." In the days that followed, the brunch lingered in my mind, not as a wound, but as a turning point. Evelyn didn't reach out, and I didn't expect her to. Her silence was her choice, and I was done chasing her approval. Caleb, though, was different. He started setting boundaries, small but significant. When Evelyn sent a group text about the next family gathering, he replied, "We'll come if everyone's treated equally. No exceptions." It was a line in the sand, and it felt like freedom. Lila, too, seemed lighter. She didn't ask about Evelyn's approval anymore. She'd claimed her place, not just at the table, but in our family, and no one could take that from her. I realized then that her courage had done more than confront Evelyn. It had awakened something in me. I'd spent years trying to fit into someone else's idea of family, but Lila had shown me that family is what you build, not what you inherit. The weeks after the brunch were quiet, but not in the tense way I'd grown used to. It was a calm that came from clarity, from knowing we'd finally spoken the truth. Evelyn didn't call or text, and I didn't feel the need to bridge the gap. For the first time, I wasn't worried about fixing things with her. My focus was on Lila and Caleb, on nurturing the family we'd created. Caleb surprised me with how he stepped up. He'd always been a good father, but now he was intentional in a way I hadn't seen before. He took Lila to her favorite bookstore, letting her pick out a stack of novels. He sat with her at night, talking about her day, her dreams, her fears. One evening, he pulled me aside and said, "I've been thinking about what Lila said, about truth and family. She's right. We need to protect that no matter what." I nodded, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. We were a team, united by our love for Lila and our commitment to her happiness. Lila, too, was different. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, like she'd shed a weight she hadn't known she was carrying. At school, her teacher told me she'd started speaking up more in class, sharing her ideas without hesitation. At home, she'd chatter about her books or her friends, her laughter filling the house. One night, as we were washing dishes together, she said, "Mom, I don't think Grandma Evelyn likes me, but that's okay. I like who I am." I stopped, the sponge still in my hand, and hugged her tightly. "I love who you are," I said. And so does Dad. The Harper family dynamics shifted too. Rachel reached out, inviting us to a low-key barbecue at her house. No porcelain plates, just paper ones for everyone. She apologized for not speaking up sooner, admitting she'd been afraid to challenge Evelyn. "But Lila's courage made me rethink things," she said. "She's family, Nora. Full stop." Mark and his wife sent Lila a care package, a sketchbook, and colored pencils with a note that read, "For our favorite artist." The gestures were small, but they meant everything to Lila, who taped the note to her bedroom wall. Evelyn, though, remained distant. I heard through Rachel that she was processing the brunch, but she hadn't reached out to apologize or explain. Part of me wondered if she ever would. Another part didn't care. I'd spent years trying to earn her approval, but I realized now that it wasn't mine to earn. My job was to protect Lila's sense of worth, to teach her that she didn't need anyone's permission to belong. One afternoon, Lila came home from school with a drawing, a family portrait. There we were, me, Caleb, and Lila, standing hand in hand, with bright smiles under a rainbow sky. "This is us," she said, pointing to the figures. "Our real family." I framed it and hung it in the living room, a reminder of what mattered most. Evelyn's traditions, her porcelain plates, her rigid definitions of family, they were just noise. Our family was defined by love, by choice, by the moments we showed up for each other. As the months passed, we started skipping some of Evelyn's events, choosing instead to spend time with people who saw us for who we were. When we did attend, we went on our terms, bringing our full selves, no longer shrinking to fit her expectations. Lila would chatter about her latest book or show off her drawings, and I'd watch with pride as she claimed her space. Caleb, too, was firmer, calling out subtle slights with a calm authority that made me fall in love with him all over again. The brunch had been a reckoning, not just for Evelyn, but for me. I'd learned that silence wasn't peace. It was surrender. Lila had shown me that courage isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet push of a plate and a single, honest sentence. She'd given us a gift, one that reshaped our family and reminded us what it means to belong. Looking back, that brunch was more than a moment. It was a turning point that redefined our family. Lila's words, "Real family doesn't hide truth behind polished silverware," weren't just a child's clever retort. They were a declaration, a line drawn in the sand that said, "We are enough." And in the wake of that moment, we became something stronger, something truer. Evelyn never apologized, and I've made peace with that. Her silence is her choice, just as our decision to prioritize our happiness is ours. We still see her at family events, but the dynamic has shifted. She's no longer the untouchable queen of the Harper family. She's just a woman with her own flaws and fears, clinging to a version of family that no longer fits. I don't hate her for it. I pity her, in a way, for missing out on the joy of fully embracing Lila. Caleb and I have grown closer, united by a shared commitment to our daughter. He's become more vocal, not just with Evelyn, but with anyone who crosses the boundaries we've set. Lila, too, continues to shine. She's 11 now, but her wisdom feels timeless. She's taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about speaking up even when your voice shakes. And I'm learning, slowly, to follow her lead. I think about that brunch often, not as a moment of conflict, but as a moment of clarity. For years, I'd believed that keeping the peace meant staying silent, that being a good wife and mother meant swallowing my discomfort. But Lila showed me that peace built on silence is fragile, a house of cards waiting to collapse. Real peace comes from truth, from standing up for what matters, from choosing love over approval. To anyone listening, I hope this story resonates. If you've ever felt like you or someone you love didn't belong, if you've ever bitten your tongue to keep the peace, know this: your voice matters. Your truth matters. And sometimes, it takes a child to remind us that courage is the key to belonging. Lila was brave enough to speak up at 11. If she can do it, so can we. Thank you for listening to our story. If it moved you, if it made you think about your own moments of courage or the times you stayed silent, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's talk in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences. Have you ever faced a moment like this? And if you want more stories about family, truth, and standing up for what's right, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss a moment. Together, let's keep telling the stories that matter.